Welcome to another Nothing Sacred interview. I'm Maxwell Silverhammer,
And I am Cruise Control.
and on the Hangout, the phone, whatever, we got Kory Flowers, who's with the Greensboro, North Carolina Police Department. Kory, how you doing?
I'm good, Max. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, thank
Absolutely.
you for joining us today. So, go ahead, Max, and you explain how you got in touch with him and what the story is around this.
What's interesting with Kory is, I guess, him and his partner, Robert Finch, go around training other police officers around the country on how to deal with sovereign citizens. So, but first, I want to get a little history on you, man, as far as how long you've been with the department, how you sort of moved up the ranks, and all that fun stuff.
Yep, sure thing, pal. So this is year 20 for me, so 2 decades. First real job after college. Got in the police department, and our department's about 800 folks or so. We've got a city of about 300,000, so a mid-sized city. As I was coming up through the ranks, I was always interested in gangs and criminal fringe groups, criminal subversive groups, anything just weird. Always kind of attracted me. So after about 8 years on the department, I did all the work and did all the homework and studied and applied and was selected to our intelligence unit. Our criminal intelligence unit monitors and tracks all the things I was just speaking about, anything out of the box. So we researched and ran cases on groups such as outlaw motorcycle gangs, white supremacist organizations, white nationalists, sovereign citizens, of course, anarchists, Antifa, police impersonators, just anything that doesn't fit in a typical box. Anything that you don't see on your typical, Friday night show, CSI, SVU, anything not that stuff, anything unconventional. So around 2008, 2009, when our economy completely tanked, the sovereign subculture exploded because, as you guys know, it promises something for nothing, basically. And so a lot of people found themselves struggling financially, looking for any last life preserver in our just disaster of an economy. And so this sovereign subculture particularly boomed about that time. Because of that, more sovereigns across the country, more encounters with law enforcement. Several of our officers stopped sovereigns on traffic stops, arrested some of these guys, and they found themselves being sued, $70-80 million very flagrant lawsuits. So us on the intelligence unit were tasked with training all of our officers on how to recognize and deal with these folks competently and safely when they should encounter them. Rob and I started looking around the country for some training so we could get trained, so then we could train our folks, and it didn't exist. So we took it upon ourselves to build the first proactive street level 101 elementary training course for cops on the sovereign subculture. So we trained our guys, ran all of our folks through it. Pretty immediately thereafter, started getting phone calls from other jurisdictions, got phone calls from all the federal service, all the federal branches of law enforcement, and then since in the last 10 years, we've trained probably 100,000 law enforcement officers from sea to shining sea in all 4 time zones, including all levels of the federal government. So it's been kind of one of those deals that we found something that was needed and filled a gaping hole in training, and it's been a wild adventure.
Okay, so I guess where we should start is from the beginning in terms of exactly what. Okay, because you get these ideas, you see all these goofy stories about how people are like, I'm a sovereign citizen and all that. I'm not too familiar with that. Before I go any further, also I do want to thank you for your service for your community for 20 years.
Oh, you're welcome.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
I'm one of those people that believes that it takes a certain individual to do police work and military work and that kind of, and I'm not that kind of individual. I'm good at my own things and have my own strengths, but we appreciate those who actually do that kind of thing because I know it can be very stressful. But anyway, and especially this kind of thing, because where did this start? And what exactly is the real logic behind the whole, I guess it's a culture or a subculture movement? What exactly is this? And
all right.
You can explain it in layman terms.
Sure. So a couple rules. Anytime you're dealing with sovereigns, you have to put all of your logical, analytical mind, all of your thinking, your logical thinking, on the sideline, because once you start asking logical questions, it all falls apart. So a couple things. The idea of sovereignty, the idea that somebody can just voluntarily check out from being under the authority of any government, has been around in our country for 75, 80 years. As a side note, the idea of sovereignty it's actually a global phenomenon. We've done consulting work for police departments in other continents on this exact same problem, particularly because the disastrous internet has really propagated this and made it easy to pass along. So again, it works for a couple reasons. One, human beings are inherently greedy, right?
Right.
Human beings are inherently self-serving, and we always want something for nothing. So this subculture promises that you can be left alone, that you can not have to worry about the cops and the courts and taxes, anything that really holds down the average citizen, corporate citizen, as these guys see them. A sovereign, once you assert your sovereignty, no longer do you have to worry about any of those normal doldrums of life. The idea of sovereignty in the United States, our American flavor of sovereignty, is kind of based loosely around a couple different conspiracy theories. The big one is in 1933, as we know historically, the U.S. Fed went off the gold standard, right? So no longer did we house enough physical gold to back our currency. So that is historically accurate, and like we know with a lot of the sovereign nonsense, they base a lot of their illogicalities within actual historical facts. So what the sovereign will say is, since that time, anybody born after 1933, the U.S. Fed since that time now uses human potential to back all of their currency, and so when you're born, you get an identification number, which is actually a secret account number, which is your social security number.
Meaning you have a barcode in your body, kind of thing?
Well, and we've, we worked some of this in a covert capacity, and there are all manner of really, really wild, additional conspiracy theories. But all sovereigns from coast to coast, whether it's a Black Moorish sovereign or a white constitutional sovereign, they'll all be based in this particular, like this bedrock foundation, that your social security number is a secret account number, and that your human potential, like the fact of your humanness, is what backs our currency. That's you as with your human potential is what allows our government to trade with other nations. And so once people digest that, if you can get folks to swallow that, then you feed them the next block, which is, look, come to my seminar this weekend, and I'll give you the tools and the training on how you can access all of these secret funds, which are yours anyway, right? They're in your name, so then you can pay off personal debts with this secret money. And so again, feeding off people's fantasy for getting something for nothing, for being greedy, and particularly when you have a crisis like the economic crisis of 0809. It really it creates like a perfect storm for folks to swallow this pill that in clearer thinking times they would probably, on its face just cast these ideas out.
It's interesting. So, because I always thought it was just like people that, and obviously we're going to get into how it relates to law enforcement and a bit, and how it relates to officers, of course. But it's just interesting how like the internet has propagated all these weird. Yes. These weird conspiracy theories into like mainstream society, like the flat earthers. It's like the similar kind of like, where are you? How do you even believe this is because they get all this information on the internet and it seems like it's valid and they have it all in one place, and then they get these echo chambers that the same people that are reinforcing these ideas, and it becomes cult-like.
That's right.
I didn't realize it was that like there was that many like branches, like a white nationalist and
sure. And say 35 years ago, before the internet was widely available, again, sovereignty existed. But if I had heard about this idea and it sounded good to me, I had to literally physically track down another sovereign and either get indoctrinated face to face or on the phone one on one. But now tonight you can just do any kind of search engine search of sovereignty, sovereign indoctrination, and you can sit in your mother's basement in your bathrobe for 50 hours and just hear some guy that you'll never see in person feed you these ideas. And again, you jump from that link to the next, and like you said, it's an amplified voice, and it's very accessible.
Well, you had mentioned 2008, 2009 was sort of the beginning of that, but I'm remembering back to the 90s with those Rainbow Tax Coalition people, the ones that said you didn't have to pay income tax. And I'm wondering, is that sort of a subdivision or a catalyst for that movement?
Yeah, so you have a lot of, again, and I say historically loosely, 70 or 80 years in the United States, these various different flavors of sovereignty have popped up, fizzled out, popped up, fizzled out. You guys have probably heard of the posse comitatus. There's all of these various forms of, people like the idea that they can get around the system, or that they can not be impaired by the system, or that they can get special benefits that the average unenlightened citizen are not afforded. The idea that I may not have to pay taxes, like that's very appealing to folks that are already kind of off center.
Right.
So you've had these flavors forever and ever.
Okay, so in relation to, it's just crazy how amazing that they have these different groups. I wonder if they all get together. Like you got the white nationalists and the black. What's the
Black Moorish? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there cohesion? Do they ever link up or what?
All right. So I mean, it is a good question. So you have like a black Moorish sovereign in the United States, an American national. He is sovereign and would believe a lot of the things about the 1933 and the Fed and the Social Security number. But he will often come at his sovereignty from more of a black historical perspective, whereas a worn-out old white guy, constitutional sovereign, say on the East Coast, may be more hung up on some of the constitutional conspiracies of sovereignty, like the 14th Amendment and the Reconstruction Acts. But if you sat those two guys down in a room, they would have more in common to talk to each other about than any two other people, because they would have these certain bedrock beliefs of sovereignty. Even though they came at it from different angles, they would have definitely a more common conversation.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of like intersectionality. It's like
Yep.
crazy. Yeah,
Yep.
it's like a weird cultish. I don't know if you know what that is, but I'm sure you probably get. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't know what that is.
Yeah, I know a lot. Yeah, I probably know more than I'd ever like to about intersectionality.
Exactly. I'm sure you do. But anyway, so this is where I think the most popular form of sovereignty is the one that you see all the time, is that person who stops on the road and says that I have my own constitution or something like that. Like I am my own government.
I'm traveling. I'm not driving.
Yeah. Or weird stuff like that. So why don't we go into like because I think you've probably seen that on obviously Max, you've seen that and that's what you see the stop where they say I'm a sovereign. They won't get out of their vehicle and they won't do anything. So people are actually, so when it comes to you have to teach this, because like why is there a need for this if it isn't so? Is it because of lawsuits? What exactly is the need to teach this and how to handle this?
Yeah.
Without being they're just crazy, because there's people that won't get out of their vehicles. I have my own rights, and you just treat them right. But why is this differently and needs different training than other forms of things?
Yeah. So a couple things. So you have legitimate crazy people, right? Yeah. We can agree. People that they're waiting for the comet to come by and pick them up, right? Those folks. But then you have sovereigns who, if you're not initiated, like if you don't pause and listen to what they're saying, you could also put them in that category. And that's what happens with law enforcement a lot. They just chalk these guys up to, that guy's crazy. He's talking about the Uniform Commercial Code in 1933 and the Social Security number and the 14th Amendment. He's crazy, right? But once you're kind of initiated, you're oriented to what these folks are saying, you can pick up on some of these buzzwords and phrases that are super universal. Whether it's a 20-year-old black Moorish sovereign on the West Coast or a 100-year-old white sovereign on the East Coast, they'll say the same few things in a very short amount of time. So what's the problem for law enforcement? Lawsuits or false property liens against your property, those are a headache, and those do happen a lot, and they are remedied. But you can run it all the way up the spectrum of danger, all the way up to physical assaults against officers, ambush-style attacks like we saw with Jerry and Joe Kane were a father and son duo in 2011 that ambushed two West Memphis, Arkansas interdiction officers and tactically ambushed them and murdered them on the side of the road. So you've got, and everything in between. You got like Wesley Snipes is a Moorish sovereign who did not pay taxes for like a decade at a multi-million-dollar salary and chose to do a 3-year federal stint in a penitentiary as opposed to paying those taxes. So the problem with law enforcement is, honestly, like folks in my trade craft, we get a bit complacent in that, if a highway patrol officer gets behind you, Max, and he stops you, you see the blue lights, you see the decal, you see his command presence, you see maybe his starched uniform and his shield, his shiny shield and his patches,
weapon, everything.
and you heed to that, because that's what keeps a democracy together, is the rule of law, that most folks will heed to that show of force, right? That's what keeps all of our society from just fraying at the edges.
But these people don't.
So we're used to that. So the idea that if I'm not indoctrinated, if I'm not oriented to spotting a sovereign, and I stop a guy, and I'm used to 99% of everybody else recognizing my authority, right? State of North Carolina on the patch, or city of Las Vegas, and then I stop a sovereign on my 10,000th traffic stop, and the guy does not recognize my authority. And the fact that I'm in a uniform, to him, that's just like a guy in a Halloween costume. and now he's questioning, I'm not driving, I'm traveling. Show me your oath of office. And what happens is officers they get flustered, they get frustrated.
Of course. Yeah.
And my profession tends to draw a lot of like a heavy concentration of alpha folks who want to win everything, including an argument, which is not optimal.
Yes, that's a good.
And so so you get hung up, and in the meantime, a lot of times these sovereigns, we've got plenty of case studies where they'll live stream these encounters, and then other sovereigns.
I just saw one today, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. And they get very volatile. I mean, that's super dangerous. And like deputies and troopers, they may be one guy, one gal for a county, and so you're out there, and now 4 or 5 guys are showing up. You have a problem, and meanwhile, you're still hung up in why is he questioning my authority? Why is he asking for my oath of office? Which that's not the time to be thinking through those things.
No, you need
so
to
we train officers on how to spot these guys fast so they can stay safe.
It's like identifying a dog with rabies almost. Like you have to identify exactly what the issue is so you can come at it a specific way without causing any undue damage and mitigating the issue. It's almost like anything else. You just have to figure out which way to come at it to reduce the chance of any kind of crazy thing happening.
That's right. That's right.
And you don't really. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Max.
I was just going to say, it's funny because all the videos I see and whatever, it seems like these officers are really patient with these guys, and I'm thinking, man, if I were a cop, I'd be dragging this guy out of the car right away. Yeah. So I mean, do you guys just be honest? Are you doing it for the entertainment? Like, I just want to see how stupid he gets.
Well, yeah. Well, the cool thing is this. I'll tell you this for certain, and I watched those videos as homework. Nobody that's ever been in any of our trainings is on YouTube. Period. Ever. And we give folks this YouTube guarantee. When they sit in our training, I tell them, look, if you just listen and do kind of what we recommend, you will not end up on YouTube because you're not going to be drawn into this madness.
Because that's part of what they want. They're actually they're trolling basically in a way. What they're doing is they're trolling, and they're using their sense of authority because they feel like they're quote unquote sovereign to goad people into being on these live streams and saying, see, I'm the victim here. And it's another, especially right now when people just don't, it's already difficult enough to be a police officer right now, considering all the cameras are everywhere. But when you've got people instigating that, when you can figure out and go, oh, he's a sovereign, okay, so I'm going to approach it in this exact way, and not going to, rise to the bait.
That's right. Yeah, and that's the challenge. Like I said earlier, a lot of my peers, we like to win, and so when our authority gets challenged and we get that kick to the ego. We train our folks. One, this is how you recognize these folks quickly. And then the second step is don't get drawn into the emotional Bermuda Triangle, right? If you stop the guy for speeding, like keep your focus on the objective. Like out of all this other nonsense that they're talking, it's just a speeding stop, right? And there's certain laws that say he has to give a driver's license. And we're not going to debate it. We're going to ask once and maybe twice if we're feeling very kind and patient. And then he's just going to go to jail. That's it. And you're not going to be on YouTube, and it's not going to be a circus. And so that's the cool part. We tell guys how to recognize these folks and what to expect. And we'll leave a training, and within a day, within a week, we'll get emails and calls from folks in trainings, and they'll say, look, I stopped a guy. It went exactly like y'all said. I followed exactly your recommendations, and he didn't get hurt. I didn't get hurt. And he went to jail, and order was restored. And honestly, a lot of times they extinguish a lot of these guys' ire. A lot of these guys, they've been indoctrinated and they think it's going to work. And then they run into a guy or a gal who's oriented and they tell them, look, they told me this was going to work. And my cops and troopers say, no, it's not real. It's not real. Sorry, pal.
So if you don't, I don't know if you want to give too many tricks of the trade out to us, us lay folk. But so what happens, let's say you got a person who stops, let's say Maxwell, like you were talking before. Maxwell's he's decided, I've gone all in on this, man. I am my own country. I'm whatever the hell, you're thinking whatever in this whole thing. I'm being simplistic about it, obviously, but but then someone stops you, and now you as an officer, do you come at it with try to logic as well, or do you just keep to ask how do you get them not to refuse? Because that's the big thing you see is that I'm not going to leave my car. You can't force me out of my vehicle. How do you de-escalate that kind of situation if they firmly believe that the Earth is flat? I mean that.
You're right, and so the question is how to deal logically with someone who's not logical. That's a challenging problem. We the big takeaway we tell our folks is just we're not going to debate. Nowhere in any laws or any state statutes are you ever mandated to argue with anybody ever, right? So I mean the law is written in black and white because it's black and white. I mean that's the cool thing about it. So we tell folks, these folks want to distract you. They want to draw you emotionally away from the reason for the stop. Again, because the subculture is promising that you can get out of everything, right? You can get out of speeding tickets. You can get out of you don't have to worry about getting arrested. You can travel. You can drive 100 miles an hour. So we tell folks, don't get drawn into that. Again, keep your eye on that, keep that dime hole focused, right? If you stopped them for running a red light, well, that's what you're investigating. And if then from there they either won't give you a license, well, that's a lot of times an additional misdemeanor, or they've got a false tag on their car, that's another additional misdemeanor. Or if a lot of times these sovereigns will say things on body camera like, I'm never going to do anything that you ask me to do, which is really great evidence for court purposes or for internal proceedings, right?
Absolutely.
You talk to the investigators later, and they ask, why did you have to end up, defeating his window and pulling him out the window? Well, investigator, I asked him, is there any, and again, we're very clear and theatrical when we ask folks, particularly on body camera. We teach folks to say things like, is there anything I can do or say in the world that would make you comply with these lawful directions? And in reply, these sovereigns a lot of times will say, no, I'm never going to do anything you say. Well, then that takes all of your options away, and it leaves you with very few, which a lot of times is some kind of force, defeating a window, pulling a guy out of the vent window, or something like that. So they'll take away a lot of your options. But if you're professional about it, it can kind of show investigators later that you were out of options. The guy had to he was going to get arrested. I mean, he made that option for himself. But he took away all of my other, discretion, just the way he behaved.
Yeah, because I do see a lot of verbal judo going on between the police officer and the sovereign citizen. It's like, well, why are you even wasting the time with this guy?
Why. Yeah, we tell folks, honestly, arguing with a sovereign is kind of like speaking underwater in German in the dark to a Russian guy. I mean, you're going to be tired. It's not going to be productive. You're going to drown.
Yep.
It's not going to serve a purpose. It's just a waste of good energy. So don't do it. Just don't do it. But that's hard, guys, because I tell you this. Have you guys ever found yourself in the middle of a nearly screaming argument, and then you realize, I don't even care at all? I don't care about this argument. I'm sure you have, because you're normal like me.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get sucked into these things, particularly with sovereigns. And then you realize, hey, I don't have to do this. This does not matter. So
right.
It's tough.
It's an ego thing in a bit, because
that's right. Because we're all human. Sure.
Yeah, and like you said, there are cases where the officers, they have a sense of authority because they have to, because they deal with different situations all day long, and that can get to people's heads sometime where they forget that they don't have to be right and they don't have to prove anything. They just have to all right, whatever.
Yep. Stick by the law.
The
law is your friend.
It's like the old Cartman cartoon. It's like, respect my authority. Well, sometimes you can't force it. You got to just. Yep.
And that's never a good. Yeah. That's just not a good rule for life anyway. I mean, whether you're teaching your 4-year-old kids or a sovereign on the side of the road, it's the same thing. Tuck your ego away. Mm-hmm. Keep you're a professional. Keep your eye on the reason that why in the world are you there? You're there because you stopped this guy for speeding. Well, he's got all these crazy ideas. That's okay. I still stopped this guy for speeding. Just, that's the way you approach it.
Right. That it's just a traffic stop. It's not.
But again, it's tough, guys. It's challenging. We've done practical trainings where we did some trainings in Michigan before where the Ford Motor Company, for instance, donated a bunch of driver's side windows, and so we did a lot of we've done practical training where it trains officers to pick up on these buzzwords, make a course of action, and then practical training on how to defeat car windows. Things where you can think ahead, so when you get hung up, you're not stuck in that decision cycle. You can actually go to your next decision, then go to your next decision, and then everybody stays safe, which is the key.
You mentioned lawsuits before. Have there been any I assume there have been instances where there are instances where the sovereign has goaded or caused officers to just screw up and just cause lawsuits and things to happen. So I assume that's one reason why you're.
Typically, the problem is I personally don't know of any sovereign lawsuit against a law enforcement official in our country that has ever paid out one dime.
Well, that's
ever.
Good.
They're all frivolous, and a lot of times they're based in really crazy allegations. Again, a sovereign doesn't believe that law enforcement has authority. So when you arrest them, they consider that a kidnapping, right? Because
I've heard that.
Right? For instance, when you write their name or type their name, a lot of sovereigns will consider their name their intellectual property. So the fact that you wrote it against their will, you just committed intellectual property fraud, right? So they'll sue you for these ridiculous ideas, but they'll be exorbitant amounts, right? So we have officers, troopers, deputies, agents come to our training, and we'll tell them, look, it's none of these lawsuits have ever been paid out. Your agency takes care of them. They seek out a summary judgment to get rid of these lawsuits. It's not a big deal, but still, it's still troubling, right? Because you still have to go home and tell your wife, hey, sweetie, we're getting sued for $70 million, but I went to this training and Rob says it's okay, so go get your nails done, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's still a real thing, because most folks in law enforcement honestly are not afraid of the bullets and the chases and the fights. Honestly, that draws a lot of people in, the idea of excitement, but the idea that there's a subculture out there that's kind of mysterious, right? That can manipulate my livelihood, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing that will often intimidate folks that are not easily intimidated.
Yeah.
I've heard they've had fake lawsuits too, where officers are actually brought in front of a fake sovereign court or something. How does that happen?
They're called sovereign within the sovereign subculture. If you're a sovereign, they'll call them common law grand juries. We on this side call them vigilante courts or vigilante proceedings, because they're not real. They're not real, but they're staged to look
like
real.
A kangaroo court type of thing or something like that.
Yeah, but with zero authority. So what happens a lot of times within these subcultures, they dislike law enforcement so much. It's also another appealing thing about this subculture. Hey, look, come to our meeting tonight. We're going to try a cop. We're going to try a judge tonight, right? And to these folks that are already that much dislike law enforcement, that's oh yeah, I'm all in on that.
So they're not actually there, of course. The officer.
No. So you guys never get arrested for an FTA, do you?
No, yeah. You can gladly fail to appear at a common law grand jury.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting if a cop or a judge just showed up and said, "Yeah."
That's right, and sat out. It would blow the whole thing. They would be complete. They wouldn't know how to proceed at all.
Of course, because the idea is it has nothing to do with reality. It has to do with But it's a weird subculture, and that's kind of the weird thing about. It's almost like an anarchist. In a way,
to a degree,
but not like almost like the non-anarchist anarchy, because we're all like each individual is their own.
That's right.
Country and stuff. But it's just interesting how you mentioned the subculture and how they actually have these meetings and groups. Yes. But I didn't realize that it was leading to stuff like ambushes and murders. So how dark and how deep does this go in terms of there have to be figureheads in this movement who are like gurus because they got to make the money, obviously, and that's how you do it.
Yeah. And a lot of sovereignty is, kind of classic pyramid scheme type mentality where there's somebody somewhere is making money. Somebody somewhere is making money at the cost of other people's, hanging their neck out there. I'll sell you my license plate, which, removes you from all government license, requirements and all safety emissions. And it's only $200, right? One-time fee. Welcome to the Moorish nation. Put this on your car, but now you have to drive it around, and you're committing, motor vehicle fraud, registration fraud. But yeah, it can get, it can get very dark. I spoke about Joe and Jerry Kane, father and son, 45-year-old, 16-year-old, father and son, sovereign duo, traveling through the Midwest, teaching folks, indoctrinating folks in these scams. And they got stopped by West Memphis interdiction officers, extremely professional guys. As soon as they get out of the car, Joe Kane, moves towards the officer and says things like, I'm a diplomat. I have diplomatic immunity. I'm carrying government secrets. Meanwhile, the son was charging and readying an AK-47 in the passenger seat of the car. You can actually see him in the dash cam video breach and then hold the door like we would do in like a SWAT takedown. And then at a predetermined period, the son comes out and ambushes the two valorous officers and murders them on the side of the road. That was in 2011. You guys probably, you may or may not remember the case of a guy named Joe Stack in Austin, Texas, flew his private airplane into the IRS building.
Oh, I do remember
about
that.
2012. Yeah, that guy was a sovereign. That's why he did it. He assaulted the IRS department because of his sovereign beliefs. Killed himself, killed one IRS agent. Yeah, total lost the building. But there's cases like that. You got the ridiculous case of Wesley Snipes, and a lot of the militia movements that we saw go to the Cliven Bundy Ranch in Nevada a couple years back, and that big standoff. A lot of those folks were sovereign. So the problem is, though, when we train law enforcement, the only big question we can't answer for them is which of these folks are physically dangerous because
Yeah.
you don't know.
Well, that's
So that's always going to be the conundrum there.
well, that's the scary part as well, because their idea is that the police aren't an authority. So when they exert authoritarian type, quote unquote, authoritarian type things like handcuffing and
That's right.
pulling people out of their vehicles, it only exacerbates and fuels their ability to say, I'm going to fight back because this is wrong. So it's just
That's right, and we do a lot of training. We train a lot of tax folks, whether it's city, state tax assessors, tax collectors. Because think about this. Think about the idea. If you were truly sold out as a sovereign, you believe that the government, in it, as it stands, it has no authority, it's not viable, right? And then you get a knock on your door from a tax person that says, "Hey, you owe us money," right? I mean, those are fighting words, right? That's a declaration of war.
Yeah, they
So you
love
can
that.
see, so you can see how these folks particularly hate tax personnel. So we do a lot of training with tax folks on just how to recognize these buzzwords and like take precautions.
Speaking of your training, I read a funny story online today. It was either you or Robert went to one of the trainings, and a guy who was in there talking big shit, about the government, and the government has no authority, this and that.
Right.
You found out later he worked for the Postal Service.
Oh yeah.
And he said that he, he needed money for his movement or something.
That's right.
why he did it.
Yeah, we started this conversation off. I was saying, take all of your logic and set it on the sidelines, because we've investigated government. Listen to this: government employees, federal government employees, who are sovereign. They'll sit in their living room and talk to you for hours about how the government is not. It's not real. It doesn't have authority, but they'll gladly cash that paycheck twice a month, right? We've investigated sovereigns who gladly collect an unemployment check or a disability check or a Social Security check. But they'll talk to you ad nauseum about how none of this is real. Like the government as it stands is not viable. I wish I could explain that, guys, but that's just you can't let logic come into this conversation.
I think the scariest part about it is that you talk to these people and they're not stupid. It's not like a lot of these people are just freaking dumb. They're not like they're. I mean, they're.
Yeah, a lot of these guys are highly educated, very educated folks, very well read.
Just well spoken, well read. They articulate their points well, just like I keep coming back to the flat earthers, just because it seems so, similar. But some of those flat earther people, they're not like complete morons. They just they buy into this, and I think it's like with a lot of people, their logic is used to reinforce their logic, but they don't use the other way around to destroy their logic. Like they only reinforce their own logic and find things that they actually see that prove it. But it's crazy.
That's right. Well, we're all drawn. It's just human nature to be drawn toward folks that are like yourself, right?
Yeah.
So that's nowhere easier to do that than online. And especially the more twisted and way off base and dark stuff, you can find a community online that you could not have found 30 years ago that will support your beliefs, and it feeds that, and it makes these folks much more virulent.
Man, well, that's I'm seeing like subdivisions of that now too, like even these they're called auditors.
Yep, First Amendment auditors. Right.
They walk around, police stations with cameras and ask crazy questions. So that's kind of part of that too, then.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said there's a we'll speak about intersectionality since you brought it up, and this will be the last time we use that word, but I'm gonna use it.
Good.
So there's a lot, there's heavy intersectionality between anti-government extremists, militia folks, conspiracy theorists, and sovereigns. And if you think about it, all of those have in common anxiety, paranoia, reading too much, getting way too deep in these things, right? Again, the internet is not your friend. It's kind of like using WebMD. Like if you have a sniffle, don't go to WebMD, right? Because pretty soon you'll self-diagnose with Ebola and West Nile, and you'll be much worse off. More information.
We know.
More information is not good, right? It's not often the optimal solution. So that's the problem. Is a lot of these. You have these First Amendment auditors who they want to go out and create confrontations with law enforcement. You have a lot of these. It also bleeds over into a lot of these like very flagrant, combative, open carry folks, Second Amendment advocates that will strap 5 rifles over their shoulder and walk down Santa Monica Boulevard wanting to be contacted by the police, right? And then when they do, they bait you into all these conversations and they video it and then they edit it, and we end up looking way worse than if we just strictly adhered by the law. Like the guys. if it's an open carry state, then that guy can do that, and we can go and talk to him. And if he doesn't want to talk to us, that's okay. But we're not getting baited into these emotionally driven conversations. It never ends well for our appearance.
Yeah, and you got the guy as Max would call them, as he always called them, the street lawyers.
Street lawyers.
Street lawyers.
Oh, yeah, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. That's right.
They're everywhere. They know the law. They know the Constitution. That the street.
Oh, yeah.
They have absolutely no idea about legal real. They've never had any. No.
The funny thing, though, I think they love to fight with law enforcement who went to school, is paid to enforce the law. So you guys got to know everything about the law. But yet, in their minds, they know more about the law than you do as somebody who enforces it.
That's right.
Or
That's right.
They just don't have any respect.
You can't argue, and you can't combat that with logic, like we said. I can't explain to this guy, because I'll give you a good example. A lot of white nationalists, like white constitutional-based sovereigns, get really hung up on the 14th Amendment. They get really hung up on it. Now, what the 14th Amendment did, so the 13th Amendment in 1866 freed all the slaves. That's it. That's basically the whole 13th Amendment. 2 years later, in 1868, the federal government realized, look, we freed the slaves, but we never gave them like a national identity. Like, they're just free. They don't have any allegiance, right? So the 14th Amendment did two things. It gave all former white state citizens, it said, y'all are federal citizens now. And it also said, all of you former black slaves, you're now also federal citizens. So it was a beautiful thing, trying to unite a country after a disastrous civil war and say everybody is now federal citizens. Now, 21st century white sovereigns now will have a problem with that. And they'll say, no, my ancestors, they never got to vote on the 14th Amendment. We were just fine being Georgian citizens or North Carolinian citizens. We didn't want a higher allegiance. So therefore, those federal taxes now, they don't apply to me. I never got to vote. You didn't ask for my ancestors' consent for the 14th Amendment. And so they'll build a whole conspiracy around just a noble amendment to our Constitution. It's wild.
So it's more victim stuff, like we always talk about. I'm a victim. I didn't get to vote in this. I was persecuted.
That's right. The world revolves around me.
It's funny. Right. Those are the same people who will bristle, and I'm not for any of this at all, but they'll bristle about reparations. Yes. How dare you? I didn't do that. My ancestors didn't. I mean, they have done stuff, but I never did that. But then, of course, when it comes to the 14th Amendment, hey, I didn't have control of my ancestors.
That's right.
It's like like they're using the same kind of pass. It's just crazy.
Right.
So
and in the meantime, and we tell in the meantime, just go to work. Like right now, take all that energy and go do something productive. Like right now, you have a lot of passion. Just direct it in a productive angle.
Yes. I see a lot of CPS videos now too. Kind of the same thing where they're live streaming when CPS shows up to take their kids, and they're screaming about Fourth Amendment and no search and seizure, and you have a warrant. So even that's kind of bleeding over into just the general now I'm a neglectful parent or an abusive parent. So they might lean towards that a bit, huh? Yeah,
and those videos are, they're honestly, they're clickbait. I mean, that's any kind of, standoff or battle, or especially an emotional screaming match between, government agents versus poor old me as a sovereign. They're going to get attention, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously.
I'm one of the people that does it, man. I'm guilty.
I am too. I mean, it's just human nature. But, the problem is, I think it's actually worse to be ill-informed than not informed at all. And so we have a whole populace now that's not ignorant. They're not ignorant. They just got a lot of really bad ideas. And that's not better. That's not a better situation.
Yeah, they're getting reinforced. They're reinforced every day. So what do you have any kind of like web information or just like places to go to look more into this, or just what can you give us
so
regarding places we can go and look at your
So it's a couple things. When we first started teaching sovereignty and we were babies in the idea, we were just trying to do something useful that other people hadn't done yet. We used to just tell people, hey, for further information, go to the internet and Google sovereign. And what terrible advice. That was horrible advice, right? You'll find yourself in these chat rooms and, just in complete virtual ditches. So we don't have Rob and I tried to determine early on, how are we going to create a platform? The problem was, anytime we put any kind of trainings out on the open internet, we had a couple of them get infiltrated. We had an event that I was teaching in Iowa a couple years ago, and the event center got a threat of violence against it before we went. So we've never been able to do that, and I've never determined a good way to do it. So honestly, the way we do our training to this day, We've got an email address or two that we use, and we do all of our, like if I get a phone call or an email, I'll do some pretty extensive vetting of the person calling before I even call them back, because we've been this particular subculture. Like, I'm tired of getting sued. It's not exciting. It's not fun. It's not sensational. We basically we'll start a dialogue on email, and then build a training program for whatever agency or department is inquiring.
Gotcha. Yeah. But in terms of just for the general public who are not police officers, because here's like a concern of mine. If I know someone's like in this mindset of sovereign, I ain't going anywhere with these people, because if I get stopped with them in a car, that violence could boil over to me, or I could be, obviously I could be related. Obviously,
guilt by association.
Most officers are going to be smart enough, and if I'm like, hey, I am not, I'm going to get out of the car, they might stop me from getting it. Like, no, you're not getting out of the car. You're whatever. So, is there any kind of like? All
right. So the resources, So the resources that I'll tell you, there's a couple agencies, there's a couple extra governmental agencies that have done good work with sovereigns. The Southern Poverty Law Center has done good work with sovereigns. The ADL has done a little bit with them, not a whole lot. But honestly, what I always tell folks, for the stuff that I can vouch for, if you will do a search engine search of my name and the word sovereign, or Rob Finch sovereign, you'll find all. I mean, we've written interviews, we've done interviews and written articles and done podcasts for 5 or 6 years. I've written articles for Police Magazine and Newsweek, and we've done interviews with the LA Times, and we've got podcasts if you don't want to read. And so anything that's got my name or Rob's name attached to it, we can vouch for. And there's plenty to read out there, the stuff that we've put out. But I always tell folks, just be careful. Like, be very cautionary where you glean this information on sovereigns for, because you can find yourself in a bad place.
Yeah, you can be like, you can find yourself like, asking you to come to a place for $200 to get your.
100%.
And you know what I mean? I'm sure even doing this radio interview, this podcast with us, you were a bit suspicious. Like, who's this guy?
Yeah, I did some reading up on you guys, for sure.
Okay, good. Well, at least you did, because I'm thinking.
I don't call anybody back at first. I mean, I'll take a phone call on a rare occasion from a number I don't know, but I just write your name down and do some backstory. And I trust you guys.
Yeah, well, we're all this is all it is.
There was even a point I think I said, can I get your phone number just in case we have a problem? And you didn't say anything, so I'm like, okay, I'm not going to push him, because I know,
Well, at that point, you probably didn't know how deep it ran. But I'm gonna keep my eyes out, because these are some types of subjects you might not even. I mean, it's just one of those subcultures that's just growing as well. It's not going to
go away.
No, if it's been around for 70 years, and now everything's being exacerbated with the internet. But Kory, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Sure thing. Yeah, good work, guys.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And so it's Kory Flowers. So we'll look up. If they want to look up anything, they can look up Kory with Sovereign. Kory Flowers, Sovereign, and Robert.
With a K. That's Kory
with a K. You got it. Kory. Yeah, and the email address, guys, if anybody is looking for training, we're at. You can just use confidentialflowers@gmail.com. All one word, and we start our conversations from there. That's how basic.
All right. If there's any law enforcement out there who are looking to get more into this, I thought, oh, this is like a little, but I didn't realize it led to this whole subculture of it's pretty crazy. But that's the internet.
Shit.
That's the internet. Now you got people that believe they're dragons, and that's not a joke.
That's right.
So
that too.
That sounds fun, actually.
The other kin, it sounds fun to believe you're a freaking dragon. They never believe that they're like earthworms. Usually,
Right.
It's always a dragon
or productive citizens.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. Or unicorn. But anyways, So we'll look up that information on the internet, and keep your eyes out for these people. Just like I said, because you never know when you're in a situation and you're trying to obey the law, and someone else is fucking that shit up for you.
Absolutely.
And
they don't want to answer questions or whatever they say.
You're just, for whatever reason, you're in there because I can't drive, so I'm in a vehicle with someone else, and I'm like, hey, what's going on? We're on a date or something like that. It's like, hey,
that's the worst shit. I take Lyft and Uber and all kinds of stuff. So imagine getting a sovereign as a Lyft driver.
Oh,
God. That's my luck. That's right.
Anyways, thanks again for joining us, Kory. We'll get this up. Actually, stay on with us after this. We're just going to wrap up real quick. Max, this has been Nothing a Sacred interview with Kory Flowers. Before we go, real quick, I do want to thank you again for your service. It's tough. Absolutely. It's tough as hell doing this shit, man. I understand that. Most people do as well.
Jumping around the country, you've taken the interest to train other law enforcement agencies, so other communities are safe too. You didn't just keep it in your neighborhood, so that's cool.
So we got you back in that way, man. We respect our law enforcement and our first responders as well. So And thank you for your time tonight. Once again, I am Cruise Control.
And I'm Maxwell Silverhammer. And that's the story there, bitches.
We'll see you next time on the Nothing Sacred Show.
Yeah.